Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Types of Functions. In this episode, we are going to talk about quadratic functions. So quadratic functions are a function that you learned a lot in Algebra 1 and in Algebra 2, and then we just continue to build on them over and over again. Quadratic functions model a lot of real life situations, gravity, velocity, there's a lot of manufacturing things that come from quadratics because you can make a box out of a quadratic. So quadratic functions are something that come up in real life situations. So quadratic function, the general equation that you will see is f of x equals ax squared plus bx plus c. And there are the potential for three terms here. You have your quadratic term with your leading coefficient. You have a linear term, and you don't have to have a linear term for it to be quadratic. And then you have a constant term, and again, you don't have to have a constant term for it to be quadratic. The quadratic could just have this term. What a quadratic can't have is a term with a degree higher than 2. So if you had x squared plus x cubed, that's not quadratic. That's cubic, because cubic is the highest degree. Quadratic functions have very distinct characteristics. Every quadratic function makes a parabola. Every quadratic function makes a U-shape. Where the U-shape falls on the graph is all dependent on A, B, and C. But every quadratic function makes a U either right side up or upside down. That is also a quadratic. This is a negative quadratic. In the previous video, we talked about polynomials. A quadratic is a polynomial, but it's a polynomial that we use so often in real life that we spend extra time on it. So you can have a negative quadratic, which a lot of gravity problems are negative quadratic, or you can have a positive quadratic. A quadratic function is always in a U shape. It has this really cool thing called a vertex. And through that vertex, you have an axis of symmetry, where you could fold your parabola in half and it would be exactly the same thing on either side. A quadratic function can have up to, and if you remember polynomials, you can have up to n x-intercepts. Well, n is 2. That's our highest degree. So you can have up to 2 x-intercepts. A quadratic function like this has 2 x-intercepts. A quadratic function like this has 1 x-intercept. And a quadratic function like this has no x-intercepts. So you have the potential to have 2 x-intercepts, but you could have 1 or none. Every quadratic function has a y-intercept. This arrow means that this goes on forever, and so that y-intercept is just out of our view right now. The domain of a quadratic function, is all real numbers. And hopefully that makes sense because a quadratic function is a polynomial. And in the last video, we just said that every single polynomial has a domain of all real numbers. Domain meaning the values you can input. There are no values in a quadratic function that we cannot input. And so that's why that domain is all real numbers. So what I would like you guys to do now is I would like you to go on to Desmos, graph a bunch of quadratic functions, see if you can make any conjectures, see if there's any similarities that you see or differences that you see. Play around, experiment, and have fun.